Breaking tonight, Ferguson on the agenda, the topic of not one, not two, but three meetings at the White House today, and the subject of a new promise from the president himself. Welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. President Obama summoning leaders from across the country today to discuss last week's grand jury ruling in Ferguson, Missouri, and the ongoing racial divide in America. Included in today's meeting, the president's go-to man on race issues, Al Sharpton. Noticeably absent from that meeting, any Ferguson City or Ferguson police leaders, although law enforcement representatives from some national organizations were there. Afterwards, President Obama vowed a new task force will help make things better, but likely will not solve every problem. Listen.
As I said last week, in the wake of the grand jury decision, I think Ferguson laid bare a problem that is not unique, and that is a simmering distrust that exists between too many police departments and too many communities of color. Too many individuals, particularly young people of color, do not feel as if they are being treated fairly. We also heard from law enforcement and were reminded of what a tough job it is to be in law enforcement. As Eric Holder put it, police officers have the right to come home. Second, one of the issues that came up during the response to Ferguson back in August was the issue of military equipment being utilized in the face of protests. I will be signing an executive order that specifies how we're going to make sure that we're not building a militarized culture inside our local law enforcement. And finally, as I mentioned, Eric Holder is going to be working in parallel with the task force to convene a series of these meetings all across the country. And part of the reason this time will be different is because the President of the United States is deeply invested in making sure that this time is different. When I hear the young people around this table talk about their experiences, it violates my belief in what America can be. To hear young people feeling marginalized and distrustful even after they've done everything right. That's not who we are.
Mr. President, do you think justice would have done in the case of Darren Eagles?
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
The president acknowledging ABC News' Jonathan Karl, but not answering the question about whether he believes justice was done in Ferguson, Missouri. To be fair, perhaps he didn't hear it over all the shouting, although he did acknowledge the reporter by name. Chris Direwalt is our Fox News digital politics editor. Chris, good to see you tonight. And so the president has a meeting at the White House with Al Sharpton, among others, a week after the Ferguson grand jury decision on a case that is a local case, but has taken on national prominence. And his decision to do that, to cast a presidential spotlight on Ferguson, Missouri, tells us what?
Well, it tells us that he is under pressure from his base. He is under pressure from those who believe the president needs to be more aggressive and go to Ferguson, give a speech, and more heartily embrace the cause of the protesters. However, it also tells us that that's not a very tenable position for him. So he is trying to walk this tightrope in which he says to the protesters, you're right, keep coming, I understand you, keep making your point, you're being heard, but at the same time knowing that for the law enforcement community and for most Americans, the answer from the grand jury and the greater detail that came out in the case makes that position untenable too. So he's trying to have it both ways.
He chooses to highlight how in this country too many people of color feel as if they are not being treated fairly. That is one perspective on Ferguson. Another perspective is this particular person of color, Michael Brown, committed a crime, a strong-arm robbery, and then committed another crime by assaulting a police officer, and then committed another crime by fleeing and evading arrest, and then committed another crime by threatening said police officer and coming back at him, according to the witness testimony. In nowhere in the president's remarks was that possibility apparently believed by the grand jury, or at least endorsed to the point where they didn't think a criminal case could be brought. acknowledged by him. It was not acknowledged by the president, nor was any even hat tip to this other possibility offered.
Well, politicians, when they're trying to cop out, like to say they want to have a discussion or a dialogue, or we need to keep the conversation going. Reality here is the 2 points on the spectrum of communication are, at one end, a young man, innocent, was killed in cold blood, murdered in the street, gunned down like a dog by a police officer. At the other end of the spectrum is that a peace officer, in the exercise of his lawful duty, rightly shot a suspect in a robbery who had attacked him. Those two things aren't a discussion. You can't have a discussion between those 2 points of view. But the president, obviously wanting to encourage Sharpton and others who are pushing the issue, but not have to publicly be seen as embracing that problematic cause, is asking for the dialogue to continue. And that's not a dialogue that will be helpful to the people on the other side.
So much for the, the post-racial president and, the healing we were supposed to see under this administration, I suppose.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The promise that he made and other people put in him is still true for a small minority of Americans who thinks he can deliver, but that's just not the case anymore.
Chris, good to see you.
You bet.
Well, my next guest was at that White House meeting. He says it's unlike anything he's ever participated in. Mark Morial is the CEO of the National Urban League, the nation's largest civil rights organization, which was founded back in 1910. He has traveled to Ferguson, and he's met with the Brown family, and he's live for us tonight in New York. Good to see you, sir. Thank you for being here.
Megan, great.
Let me start with this. What, if any, responsibility do you believe that the community will take for the distrust that exists between law enforcement and the community in places like Ferguson?
Today's conversation was about beginning a dialogue and a conversation. It's important to recognize that the Michael Brown case is but one case. There's been this combination of cases, the Eric Garner case here in New York, the 12-year-old boy in Cleveland, the great-grandmother in Los Angeles, the Trayvon Martin case a year or so ago. All of this has come together and once again raised this, for some people, uncomfortable issue of the relationship between police and communities, particularly communities of color. So today was about a discussion, and I might add, the president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police was there. The police chief of the great city of Baltimore was there. A number of mayors, de Blasio, Nutter, Barrett, were there. Of course, a number of civil rights leaders were there, and many of the young people who were engaged in peaceful protests were there. This is a good conversation that took place. The conversation itself is not going to solve anything, but the context of it was, of course, the announcement of the task force that will be headed by Commissioner Ramsey of Philadelphia.
I get that, but the focus from the White House tonight seemed to be on how are we going to address what's happening with law enforcement. And I think a lot of the people who watched what happened in Ferguson, and you cite some other examples, some of which are more compelling than others, certainly that case in New York City with the chokehold against an African-American, is going to go to trial, and it's probably not going to end well for the officers there. But the Trayvon Martin case, the viewers are familiar with that and so on. I think a lot of folks are asking about Ferguson. You know what? This isn't a clear-cut case to millions of Americans of overreaction by law enforcement. Many think Michael Brown was committing a crime, and if you don't want to get shot by a cop, don't grab for his gun, don't mess with him in his police car, and don't charge him when he's telling you to surrender, which is what the grand jury apparently believed happened here.
The issue, Megan, and you know this as a lawyer, is not the guilt or innocence of Darren Wilson. The only issue before the grand jury was whether there was probable cause to indict, which struck me as a very unusual grand jury process carried out by Robert McCullough, including the release of secret grand jury testimony to the public. I believe that justice was not done, and that's why I am a supporter of the fact that there are two twin investigations by the Department of Justice.
I get that, but this is different. This is the White House saying this is where we shine the spotlight. On the cops is what he seemed to be saying.
No, that's not the point, Megan. The spotlight should be on the problem. And the problem is that statistics show that there were more people killed by police officers than at any time in the last 20 years. The fact of the matter is you've got this confluence of events that have taken place, and the fact is
in the past 50 years,
lack
I just want to correct you on that.
O'Reilly
just put this on the board, and we checked it with our brain room. In the past 50 years, the rate of blacks being killed by cops has gone down 70%. 70%.
You missed my point, Megan. You missed my point.
123 blacks were shot dead by police.
You missed my point. I didn't say blacks. I said citizens shot by police over the last. In the past year was higher than it's been in 20 years. I didn't say blacks or whites. I said citizens.
99% of police arrests go down without anyone being killed.
Let's talk about the point. The point is that there are problems and tensions. I ran a city. I understand the challenges sometimes between police and communities. And we made a lot of progress through the use of community policing when I was mayor of New Orleans. This is a problem we can solve as a nation, but we can't solve it if we pretend that it isn't an issue. If you talk to many cops on the beat around cities in the nation, you'll find many who say, yes, we need to improve relationships between police on the beat and people in communities, particularly communities of color.
I don't think anybody's going to give you a hard time about that. The relationship needs improving. But the question is, where will the focus be? Will it be solely on the cops and their militarization and their lack of body cameras, or will it also be on the communities to find out why is it the police in some instances don't trust these communities? Or why don't they get more credit for protecting and patrolling the communities, as Charles Barkley put it in his own words today? Let me play you the soundbite from him on our radio show.
Them who are looting, those aren't real black people. Those are scumbags. We have to be really careful with the cops, man, because if it wasn't for the cops, we'd be living in the wild, wild west in our neighborhoods. I think we can't pick out certain incidents that don't go our way and act like the cops are all bad. Do you know how bad some of these neighborhoods would be if it wasn't for the cops?
Your thoughts on that?
What's the point? The point is that there's no doubt the number one duty of police is to provide for public safety. And no doubt that across America, there are many good law enforcement officers. We're focusing on practices, we're focusing on incidents where there are problems. So this is not a suggestion of condemnation of law enforcement or police officers. This is about whether we acknowledge that there are problems that have to be addressed in this nation and whether we are going to take the steps necessary to do it. The meeting I participated in, what I hope is that at the community level, at the city level, there will be dialogue between law enforcement, elected officials, and community leaders to try to improve those relationships so that the ultimate mission of police to provide for a safe community is always going to be the focus.
Well, I know that the rate of violent crime went down considerably when you were running New Orleans, sir, and I congratulate you for that, and I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thanks, Megan.
All the best to you.
Thanks, Megan.
Also tonight, the St. Louis Rams just finished a sit-down with outraged police groups after this public protest minutes before an NFL game. Up next, what the league is saying tonight and how police are responding. Plus, a week after the grand jury decides not to indict Darren Wilson, the Department of Justice doubles down on threats of misconduct within the Ferguson Police Department. Based on what? Mayor James Knowles is here to respond in moments.
Our police officers cannot be and cannot be seen as an occupying force disconnected to the communities that they serve.